To you, Kami.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks, Kelly. Great presentation. Okay, so next up, it is with pleasure that I will now introduce you to our presenter who is dialing in all the way from Australia, Dr. Veronique Richard, who will speak to you about the stories of creative movement ideas. Veronique Richard earned her doctoral degree in sports science from the University of Montreal, then went on to complete a postdoctoral fellowship in sports psychology at Florida State University. Her research focuses on the effects of creativity enhancement on motor performance and psychological adaptation. She is currently having a rich and varied performance psychology practice, primarily working as a mental performance consultant with different Canadian national teams, such as water polo and artistic swimming, as well as individual elite athletes from gymnastics, figure skating, trampoline, and many others. As a mental performance advisor for Cirque du Soleil, Veronique Richard supports artists to optimize their performance and ensure their well-being. Additionally, she is an associate researcher at the Montreal National Circus School, working on several creativity projects. Over to you, Dr. Richard.
Thanks, Kami. Actually, I wish I was down under right now. I'm under, but not totally down under. So I'm in Florida. Hopefully going to Australia soon. Little visa delay here, much more complicated to get down under than I thought it would be. So hi everyone, it's kind of unfortunate that we see no one in this type of platform. I would like to see your face and see who's actually listening, but today I'm going to talk to you about a project that we conducted at the National Circus School in Montreal, a project that is very dear to my heart. Actually, this idea of tracking ideas, which I know it's a lot of idea, actually arise in a cafeteria discussion that I was having with the director of the research program at the National School. And we were a little bit criticizing the creativity research because it tends to only look at one aspect of creativity at the time. It's okay to look at one aspect at a time, but we thought that because of that, it kind of is never really representative of what creativity is really, especially when creativity deals with movement. So we thought that, there was this 4P theory of creativity, which is like looking at the person, looking at the process, looking at the pressure of the environment, or looking at the product. And usually one research is looking at one thing, and we're like, is there a way that we could look at everything at the same time? And then the idea of, hey, what should we look at if we want to look at everything at the same time? We cannot just look at the characteristic of the person, because then we kind of not look at the process. So then we're like, what's in between? What's the thing that unite all those things? And we were like, well, the idea is actually the true object of creative research. We're looking at creative ideas, and then we look at who is getting those creative ideas, under which circumstances the creativity ideas emerge, and what is the outcome of processing those ideas. So our idea was, sorry for the overuse of the word idea, was to look at the journey of an idea. And to do so, we were like, okay, we need to find a more holistic definition of creativity, which we found in the perspective of Vlad Glavenue, which has become a good colleague of mine over the last few months. So according to Vlad Glavenue, he used a very social cultural perspective of creativity. So creativity is concerned with the action of an actor or a group of actors if creativity emerge as a group process, and is in constant interaction. And you will see today, we will talk a lot about interaction with multiple audiences. And by audiences here, we don't just mean like a public that is watching a circus show, for instance, but any audiences that is participating in the creative ideation. So could be a teacher, could be a peer, could be just someone watching like randomly or by coincidence. So not only in constant interaction with this audience, but also in constant interaction with the affordances of the material world. I'm stopping here 2 seconds because I know this word can be a little technical. So affordances is basically defined as the opportunity of action provided by the environment. So the goal is to act meaningfully on the environment, which can lead or not to the generation of new and useful artifacts. So from this 4P model, we then turn into a 5A model. So the action of the actor in constant interaction with audiences and affordances, which hopefully can lead to artifact. So where is movement fitting in all this? Well, the project was actually because we thought that, you know, when we follow ideas that are in the head, it's very hard to track because a lot of thoughts can be generated without an external person to even notice that those thoughts are generated. But at the National Circus School, one of the main goals of students and teachers is to create new and interesting and novel movement. And to track movement, well, actually to track ideas in movement, they still need to move. So you kind of see their train of thoughts through their body. So we thought, okay, so then we'll go and observe what's going on at the National Circus School. So what I did is that I observed especially dyads. So just to give you a little bit of background on the school, the students are having one main circus discipline that they train most of the time. And they also need to pick a secondary discipline, which they train a little bit less of the time. And most of the classes, so there is group classes, of course, but most of those creative classes, they happen in dyads. So one student artist or 2 or 3, depending on what's the discipline. So if it's an individual discipline, there's one student with one teacher, and sometimes even one student, one teacher, and the artistic advisor. If, of course, they are more than one artist performing, there's some discipline that cannot be performed alone, like hand to hand, for instance, there are always 2. Or if you take a Russian bar or teeter board, these are disciplines that are performed many students together. So then it will be this small group of students with one teacher, and they spend most of their session trying to innovate their discipline. So I observed more than 80 hours of those creative movement session, and I observed the interaction. So again, I did not observe the student. Well, of course, the students were present. I did not specifically just look at what are the characteristics of the student, or what are the characteristics of the teachers, or what are the processes that they are going through. What I was observing is their ideas. What's funny is that circus artists and their teacher will tend to give names to their idea. So when they start working on something, they give names to these ideas, which make the ideas quite easy to track. Okay, I'm really very sorry if you hear some music right now. I'm actually at Cirque du Soleil, and I didn't know that I was going to hear the music from where I am, but I do. So I'm very sorry about that. If you do hear the rest of the presentation, might have a little background music. So by looking at ideas for 80 hours and also spending much more hours just hanging out in the school, trying to really understand the culture, we developed a mapping. So what the circus school wanted to know was like how ideas were emerging in those student teacher artistic advisor interaction. And at the beginning, what we decided to do is try to illustrate what was going on. And don't get me wrong, it was not easy. If I could have a hologram, like a kind of 3D way of modeling what I really saw happening at the school, I think it would be the best solution. Unfortunately, well, if the technology exists, I did not have access to such technology. So I used a good 2-dimension paper type of drawing thing. So don't judge too much the figures of this. So the first thing, and by the way, I will show you 2 figures or 2 illustration, but if I could make all of this blend together, I would. So yes, now we are looking at more what's environmental, so the actors, the audience, and the affordances, which, sorry, here, affordances is not well written. And then we will look at more process and actions, but like all of this can be blended together. So one of our first observation or conclusion is that the external climate or environment and the internal climate was very important. What does it mean? So first, let's look at the Venn diagram. The Venn diagram is the encounter of those 3 main people interacting all the time together through the creative movement process. The outside layer, the very dark layer, is representing all their cultural background, where they are coming from, like what they bring in with, no, what they bring to the school with them. Then the gray layer here, the second layer, is what the school kind of influenced the students. So what they get from the school, which also influence in the end, how they feel right now. So every time there was a class, there's at least two of these people showing up, and they show up with their background, they show up with the knowledge they got at the school or from any other education or any other experience. And then they also show in a specific state. And we can feel that this creates an internal climate between the actors and audiences involved. But of course, the external environment and the affordances that this environment provide is also very important. Something that was really obvious at the school is that there's this continuum of external stimulation, from studio that are completely silent, like studio that are small studio, but no one is bothering the artist or the teacher. They can really focus on the task at hand. There's no external stimulus, or really few. This I call the type of bubble type of environment. So this was a type of environment. And then at the other end, you have the total opposite, which some of the gym at the national schools are full of people. You can have trapeze at the back of the studio, and then you have pole, and then you have tissue, then you have people in the middle doing surreal or any type of moving discipline. So this can also impact a lot, both the actors in the environment, but also the affordances perceived. And then you have some external people that are not necessarily in the Venn diagram. They are not the artist, they are not the teacher, they are not artistic advisor, but they still are curious eyes. So I don't know if you see that they are eyes, but there's always people watching what's going on, whether they are curious, whether they are critical, whether they are collaborative, or they are just learner. There's people surrounding the creation of movement all the time. So external climate, internal climate, very important. And if you look in the middle of the Venn diagram, what does this actually set the table for? Well, it set the table for a desire to emerge, the desire to move creatively. And this, of course, lead to an now, don't freak out. I know it's a lot of things. I will not go through all this. Don't worry. It would take just like 2 hours just explaining you this whole thing, but I'll do just a really quick overview of this model. But yes, these external climate, internal climate, they kind of make the desire to create emerge. And this desire, which you can see to the left of your screen, which we will talk a little bit more later on about, but like this desire is actually always in dissonance with the actual state. So there's and people are not satisfied yet about the state of their performance, and they want to create movement by implementing some strategy. So here you feel the discomfort, which lead into, okay, let's try to find a solution. Let's do research. It's very interesting. I won't read the whole list, but this is stuff that any teacher, any people that are interested in stimulating creativity can actually implement. But what's the most important? No matter what is the strategy that you decide to use to search for different ways to move, what is very important is this balance here. You see it's slightly unbalanced, but just a little bit. And we'll talk about this balance later on, which leads to the generation of ideas, which the generation of ideas will also emphasize here on the emotion that arise, because let's be honest, any creative journey is full of emotion, whether it is this wow factor of creating something new and like perfect for what you were searching for, or whether it is like an experimentation that just makes no sense and everyone is like, ew, this is not at all what we were searching for. This, no matter whether it's wow or whether it's arc, in French it sounds better, well, it will lead, no matter what, to a repertoire expansion. You learn from finding like what you were not searching for. So you learn that something it doesn't work. So this ideation, those action that you're implementing in your environment will teach you no matter what happened. And then of course we go into a phase of assessment, whether the idea has potential, whether we want to refine the idea, and whether finally we want to integrate and pursue. Maybe one last thing that you will notice in the mapping is all these little latent idea cloud. So each time the artist decide, and the artist teacher, artistic advisor decide together not to pursue an idea, one thing that I notice is that the idea never disappears. The idea never dies. Actually, it just stay latent. It's there because once you had an idea, you cannot really like, it will be always there. Maybe it will become dusty. Maybe you will never really build on that, but maybe you will. I saw idea disappear, reappear, disappear, reappear in different contexts for different reasons. So if that can stimulate your own creativity, just know that when you're generating ideas, even if they are not acted on now, that doesn't mean it was a worthless process. It can be very worthwhile, especially for your repertoire expansion. So what are we going to focus on today? It's first or second, I think, the idea of the balance, because that's quite useful for even other domains that are dealing with movement and trying to make movement maybe more creative. And then we will also discuss the emotional journey. Everything that is emotionally related, we'll take a little moment to talk about it. One thing I wanted to let you know before I move on to something else, I was maybe thinking of reading to you some stories that we've created with the journey of an idea, but what I will do instead, because of a lack of time, I'm going to orient you towards the paper that will be out very soon. It's not out yet. What we've decided to do. So we have one paper about this journey of an idea, which is just explaining the mapping that I just presented to you. But then, it was like, this is good. But what I observed was more than that. It's not just describing the journey of an idea, but it's the stories. The stories are really telling what's the journey of an idea. And what we've decided to do is to use creative nonfiction to write about those stories. And at the beginning, I write those stories from a third person point of view. And it was good. It was very factual. But then when I show it to the director of the research center, he was like, Vero, it's good stories, but like, isn't it supposed to be creative nonfiction? And I was like, yeah, but he's like, I don't see much the creativity. Like I see the stories. So what we did is that we wrote those story again, but instead of narrating them from a third person perspective, we narrate them from the idea perspective. So we humanize the idea and we make the idea like tell the story of what was happening. So whatever, maybe now it's sounds very weird, but if you want to read those story, they're going to be out in the journal that I just posted here. It should be out in a few weeks, I would say. So if you want to read about movement, creativity, and some ideas that some journey of idea that happened at the school, it's right there. So what are our main conclusion, which I think now could expand to other domain and not just circus and not just not just circus, like any movement. And my goal maybe is to influence you to move more creatively. So first conclusion, the journey of ideas were radically embodied. In the creative literature, ideas are often perceived as a cognitive concept. So ideas always happen in the mind first, and then they instruct or they guide our action. But this is not what we saw. We also saw the other way around, that sometimes the body was guiding the brain. And what I mean by that, I'm going to just tell you a story. So, or story or something I observed so many times actually. So, you know, when artists are creating their movement, at some point, like they get into their moment and then they start moving with their apparatus when it's the case. And then very often there will be this sudden, like, great movement that express something very clearly. And then both the artist and the teacher will be like, wow, that was very cool. Do you remember what you did? And then both the teacher and the artist look at each other and they're like, I don't know what happened. Like, I was just going with the flow. I was just following my body. And then boom, this great transition movement or this great twisting movement or this great like flexibility movement happened. And then it went so fast that I'm not so sure what I did. So very implicit, very not governed by the brain. When we are fortunate enough, those artists were filming themselves so they can retrieve what they did. But very often, this idea, this moment of creation was just governed by a total embodiment, which means that it's not true that it was just guided by conscious cognitive processes. Actually, if I expand even more than that, we concluded that at the National Circus School, ideas emerge from a united body and mind, so embodied, coupled with various environments, so embedded within the environment, and relevant object, so extended, which are acting on in meaningful way. So inactive. So this actually relates to the 4E of radical cognitive perspective. And I invite you to think about how you teach movement, because sometimes we teach a body thing, but if you want to, just make things differently or different sometimes, how much do you create space where there could be full embodiment? How much this can be coupled with various environment? How much do you vary the affordances that your environment are providing? How different the object, the material is in your moving environment, and how much do we act with a purpose in mind, a meaningful way? So this could be a way to actually enhance movement creativity. But there's other conclusion. I mentioned I kind of put two squares in the big mapping. We realize that moving creatively is actually quite an emotional journey. There's two big emotional moment that happened in this, which, I believe can be quite transferable to other life circumstances. The first one is the desire, which we could call like a deep motivation to engage with your environment. And like I said, desire was in dissonance with the current state of a situation, a dissonant desire, which instills discomfort and evoke motivation to explore. It was very difficult for me from the list of desire that you can retrieve in the big mapping to just list down desire like that. When you talked about deep motivation, when you talk about desire, writing it in a prose way was kind of like, it doesn't represent how strong it is. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to just stop talking for 1 minute here. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to read about all the desire that I've seen in school. If you're a creative mover and you want to write in the chat which desire seems to resonate with you, I would be more than happy to read you. If not, don't worry, but I'm going to leave you a minute, read the poetic way I put the desire together, and we'll come back together in a minute. So I hope this can give you different ideas on there will be many desire to move creatively and nice. Okay, I love that some of you are writing. Yes, and maybe you loved yeah, the music. Sorry, I was reading the chat. Yeah, the music. I don't know how much you hear the music, but yeah, maybe you were hearing the music while you were reading. So this the different desire to move creatively will be different for everyone. But the fact that the last two sentences, that you can create this kind of discomfort that will push people and motivate people to move differently because there's a problem to solve, or because there's this attractiveness to make things differently or express something with their body, it will be a different motivation. Some people will be more inclined to move creatively with a problem solving in mind, but other will be more expressive, and other might be more connected, like socially connected. Whatever it is, it's super important for you, if you want to instill more movement or creative movement in your environment, to realize that it's going to start with this start. I hate to kind of put things in a chronological order, but at some point there will have to be a desire to go in that direction, which this is kind of the fuel of the journey of an idea. So again, this is just a little poem here to maybe give you some ideas, which leads me to also talk to you about, you remember those stars that was written wow or arc, which for me, if you ask me the question, is it better to be in a positive mood or so-called positive emotion, or is it better to instill an environment which will ignite like so-called negative emotion to create, like, what's best? The literature that I've read, and I haven't read everything, but for the literature that I've read, the tendency is towards more positive emotion should help the creative process. But what I've seen at the school is very different. Actually, what I've seen is that those that are harnessing all sorts of emotion are maybe those that are connecting with their movement, with their ideas, and with their creativity the most. What does it mean is, like, instead of asking or trying to put yourself in a state that might not fit your current need, I suggest you ask yourself, what is functional for you in the current situation? So I've seen artists being very angry about something and really using this anger as a way to support their creative movement. And I've also seen, or heard, I should say, artists expressing their fear towards going very high in the sky. Okay, it's a bit exaggerated here, but going very high and be like very afraid. But this fear, at the same time, when it's well used, can lead to something interesting. And I've also seen moments of sadness that led to very interesting movement. So I cannot say, and of course, I've seen also joy and happiness transforming in great creative moment. So even at any level that you might be involved with, just making sure that people understand that here, when we're moving creatively, all emotions, if used efficiently, are okay. And it's even maybe a way to regulate your own emotion and a way to experience a wide variety of emotion, which we know now that emotional flexibility is actually a skill that can be transferred to other things. So again, there's not a perfect answer around emotion, but harnessing all types seems to maybe be a interesting pathway for the future. So now we've talked about embodiment, fully embodied. There's no difference with mind and body. It's just everything moves together and influence each other. We've said that the journey was very emotional and emotions are highly involved in creative movement, at least at the circus school. So that has a big impact on pedagogical journey. The way you teach movement creativity might be, maybe some of you teach also technical movement this way, but for me, one thing that was very obvious is that the teacher, they move away from being movement designer, but they became environmental designer. What does it mean is that they were not, it's movement creativity, so you don't even know what to expect. But they became these people that were creating an environment. And you remember my little balance in the map that I showed at the beginning? Well, I would like this to be a bit tilted, but the only picture I found was this equal balance, which is also fine. But by environmental designer, what I mean here is that people were like teachers were actually making sure that when they were introducing those research strategies or their refinement strategy, it was providing a challenge, whether it is imposing a constraint, an improvisation, kind of imposing variety. I don't really like imposing, but implementing variability, problem solving, novelty, some sort of uncontrollability or ambiguity, or even unpredictability or spontaneity, whatever they were using, they were always making sure that it was balanced by the perceived resources of the student, effectively, cognitively, physically, artistically, socially, name it. And I've seen research, and by the way, don't feel bad if sometimes like the balance is not like well like is not balanced, basically, because it happened at the school. I will give you an example. So one day a teacher came with the idea, it was an artistic advisor actually, he came with the idea that the artist had to, he wanted to stimulate movement creativity through noise. So he was asking the artist to generate sound while moving. So he thought that this could kind of challenge the artist, but for one of the artists, it was too much, because she was so focused on trying to generating sound. It's like she could not manage the rest. Everything was robotic, didn't work at all. But then the teacher noticed, and he was like, okay, he let the artist navigate the situation for a little bit. And then it was obvious that this was too much for now. Maybe not, maybe the artist would do this today and it would be just fine. But for now, it was too much. And he really tried to just change the strategy and move around with this, which in the end was a very productive session, which started very poorly, but ended up being a good. So go test your student when you're moving with them, or moving or helping them to move creatively. That can be a good thing to do. And you know what? This relationship between perceived challenges and perceived resources is interestingly linked to other psychological skills or state, like adaptability and flow state, without getting into the too much details, because I see time is running very fast. There's many other psychological aspect that seem to have the same type of relationship. If you give a good challenge and the person perceive that she or he does have the skills to navigate the challenge, then there's a growth coming out of it. Which lead me to this concept of potential and possibilities. So I started with a certain definition of creativity, and by seeing movement creativity over and over again, I'm questioning how implementing some of those types of creative movement activities within other environments, like sport, for instance, which I've personally tried many times, successfully and less successfully, but most of the time it works pretty well. And you know, the state of also high performance or just performance domain. Oops. I was actually questioning, like, if we take what does it take to be in a good mental health, or what's the definition? And the first beginning of the definition of mental health by the World Health Organization, it's a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential. And personally, I would add an S to potential to make it potentials, because I think we can see we have many potential. And then my exploration of creativity led me to this other definition, which now I'm very interested about. So creativity can be defined as a process that both explores and expands the area of possibility for individual, groups, and societies. It should not be reduced to a product or a creative person, but defined by the expanded zone of possibility. That creative action built on and open for self and others. So by moving creatively, I think people do expand their zone of possibility. And when we have more possibility, well, maybe we can fulfill or realize our potential more, which may support our mental health in the end. So I'm leaving you with this idea of exploring what's your perceived potential and current perceived potential and possibility. You know, when I'm doing creative movement session, what I often hear is this: I'm not a good mover, movers, sorry. I can't move that way. I look so ridiculous. So these are the initial perceived potential of people. I try to just increase the amount of possibility of movement. Whatever it is, I just make sure the environment is offering so many different options of movement. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm just stimulating or providing the right stimulus to bring people to explore their potentials and all the possibility of the environment. And at first, to be honest, people are very uncomfortable because it's a lot of freedom. We claim that we want freedom all the time, but when we do have it, we don't know all the time how to navigate freedom situation. But gradually, by exposing people to situation where they can move freely, where they can move differently, where they can express their emotion through movement, it becomes more and more comfortable. And then either you get more comfortable and you really appreciate, or you just start tolerating the discomfort. And by doing this, people are slowly but surely increasing their zone of potential and possibilities. And guess what? At some point, you realize that your potential is maybe bigger than you even thought it was, and you start seeing more and more possibility around you. So to kind of wrap up, it's not really about thinking or moving outside the box. Thinking outside the box, which is very cognitive. That's why I kind of put the moving. It's more about expanding your box. And that's what I've seen at the National Circus School. Students are just very interested in expanding their box, expanding the potential, expanding the possibility, and then just build on that. And I think overall, unless enough people are motivated by the enjoyment that come from confronting challenges, by discovering new ways of being and doing, there's no really evolution of culture, no progress in thoughts and feelings. So that's why I'm encouraging all of you to think about ways of moving differently within your environment, with your people, wherever and however good mover you are, because I think it can lead to really interesting outcome on that note. Merci beaucoup.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you.